Our next grammar topic is sentence structure. Before you can understand some of the mistakes that students usually make with sentence structure, you have to understand how to form correct sentences. So that's what we'll be talking about. Today, we're going to be talking about sentence structure. In order to understand some of the mistakes that students usually make with sentence structure, it's important that you understand how to form correct sentences in English. So let's start with the basics. There are several different parts of a sentence: a subject, a verb, and an object. You probably have heard about these three things, but maybe you don't really understand exactly what they are. So let's start with, what is a subject? What is a verb? And what is an object? Okay, so first of all, a subject is the focus of the sentence, meaning the subject is who or what the sentence is about. The verb is usually the action of the sentence. However, sometimes the verb can be a word that just describes the state of being, just connects the subject to the situation that exists. For example, the be verb. If I say, I am a teacher, I'm not doing any action. That verb is just connecting the subject to the object. So let's talk about that next. An object. What is an object? An object is a person or thing that is affected by the action of the verb or is somehow linked to the subject by the verb. Don't forget that word order in English usually follows this pattern: subject first, then the verb, then the object. Now this changes sometimes, particularly when we're forming questions in English. The word order changes. However, it generally follows this pattern. We do sometimes add extra words. Sometimes we add modifying words like adjectives or adverbs or other phrases or clauses that can change things. But generally, a sentence follows the pattern subject, verb, object in English. Continuing with the basics, there are basically two groups of words in English. So first of all, we have a phrase. A phrase is a group of words that has no subject or no verb or neither one. Then we have another group of words that is called a clause. A clause is also a group of words, but a clause always has both a subject and a verb. We'll talk a lot more about clauses later on, but let's look at a few examples of phrases. So here's a few examples of phrases. In the morning. This is what's called a prepositional phrase. Another example of a phrase, a beautiful day. This is a noun phrase. And one more, running for the bus. This is a participial phrase. There are other types of phrases. These are just a few examples. But what you should notice is that all of these groups of words are missing either a subject or a verb. In the morning, there's no verb. A beautiful day, there's no verb. Running for the bus, it's missing a subject and it's not a complete verb. So all of these are not sentences because they don't have either a subject or a verb. All right, so now let's talk about sentences. How do we actually form a complete sentence in English? Well, there are 4 types of sentences in English. So there's basically 4 different ways that we can make a sentence. We can make what's called a simple sentence, a compound sentence, a complex sentence, and a compound complex sentence. Remember how I mentioned clauses earlier? A clause is a group of words that has a subject and a verb. Well, a simple sentence is what we call an independent clause. Think about an independent person. An independent person doesn't need help. He or she can be alone, can do things on their own, and an independent clause is the same. It has a subject and a verb like all clauses do, and it's a complete thought, which means it can stand alone as a sentence. So here's a few examples. Notice that the subject is in blue and the verb is in red. I am a teacher, one subject, one verb, finished thought. The dog is sleeping, studying English grammar is my favorite hobby. A compound sentence is two independent clauses joined together. So basically two sentences joined together. And this means that you will have two subject and verb pairs. Here's some examples. I am a teacher and you are a student. So I've got I am, one subject and verb. You are, another subject and verb. The dog is sleeping, the cat is awake. Studying English grammar is my favorite hobby. However, I like playing guitar too. So all of these are compound sentences. Now there are a couple of different ways, as you probably noticed, a couple of different ways that I can put two independent clauses together. So let's talk about some of those different ways. First, I have an informal compound sentence. An informal compound sentences use something called a coordinating conjunction. Coordinating conjunctions connect two independent clauses together. Coordinating conjunctions, you might already know them as fanboys. So fanboys is a way to remember the coordinating conjunctions: F for, A for and, N for nor, B for but, O for or, Y for yet, and S for so. We don't use all of them very commonly. The ones that we use most often in English are and, but, or, and so. And we use to connect to similar ideas, but to connect to opposite ideas, or to connect to choices, and so to connect to a cause to an effect. Now, one thing that you might also be wondering is about coordinating conjunctions is that you can also use coordinating conjunctions to connect words and phrases together. I don't have to use them to connect only sentences. I can use them to connect words and phrases. I can just say I have a apple and a banana, or I teach in the afternoon and at night. So I can use coordinating conjunctions to connect words and phrases. However, we are just focusing right now on how you use coordinating conjunctions to connect two independent clauses together. One thing that's really important to remember when you're connecting two independent clauses with a coordinating conjunction is that you use a comma before the coordinating conjunction. So take a look at these examples. The coordinating conjunction is in green. I am a teacher, comma, and you are a student. The dog is sleeping, comma, yet the cat is awake. Studying English grammar is my favorite hobby, comma, so I study every day. Let's talk about another type of compound sentence, which is a formal compound sentence. There are two ways that you can create a formal compound sentence. One way is to use a semicolon. You can see the example there of what a semicolon looks like to connect two independent clauses. It's important that the ideas be similar or that the relationship is very clear so that they're clearly connected without using a connecting word for those two sentences. So the example here, the dog sleeps, semicolon, the cat is awake. The relationship here is very clear because we're talking about being awake or asleep. Those two ideas are very closely connected, and so we can use the semicolon to join those two independent clauses together. You can also connect an independent clause with a special connecting word called a transition word, also sometimes known as a signal word. To do this, you need both a semicolon and a comma. Some examples, here the transition word is in green. I am a teacher, semicolon, however, you are a student. The dog is sleeping, semicolon. In contrast, comma, the cat is awake. Studying English grammar is my favorite hobby, semicolon. As a result, comma, I study every day. The last type of sentence that we'll really discuss in detail is the complex sentence. A complex sentence is one independent clause and one dependent clause joined together. So what is a dependent clause? Well, think about a dependent person. The person always needs help. That person can't do anything on his or her own, always is asking people to do things or help with things. So a dependent clause is the same. Now remember, it is a clause, so it does have a subject and a verb, but it's not a finished thought. That means it cannot be a sentence on its own. There are three types of dependent clauses: adverb clauses, which are sometimes called subordinating clauses; adjective clauses, which are sometimes called relative clauses; and noun clauses. We will talk about adjective clauses and noun clauses later. Right now, we're just going to focus on adverb clauses and how we use adverb clauses in complex sentences. Okay, so one way to create a complex sentence is to join an independent clause to an adverb clause. An adverb clause, also called a subordinating clause, looks just like an independent clause, except that it has what's called a subordinating conjunction. There are many subordinators. Here are some examples: because, since, as, while, when, before, after, until, even though, although, if, unless. There is a handout posted with a much more detailed list of different types of sentence connectors, including coordinating conjunctions, transition words, and subordinators. So you can see a nice, long, detailed list and the different ways that we use some of those connectors. So let's look at some examples. One way to use an adverb clause is for the adverb clause to come before the independent clause. When this happens, you want to use a comma in the middle. Use a comma to separate the two clauses. Here's some examples. So notice that the subordinator is in green and the dependent clause is underlined. While the dog is sleeping, comma, the cat is awake. So while the dog is sleeping is my dependent clause. The cat is awake is my independent clause. Because studying English grammar is my favorite hobby, I study every day. So the first part of the sentence, that's my dependent clause. Then I study every day, that is my independent clause. And together, those two clauses make a complex sentence. You can also create a complex sentence with an adverb clause by having it follow or come after the independent clause. In this case, you do not use a comma. The cat is awake while the dog is asleep. Notice there is no comma when the subordinator while is in the middle of that sentence. I study every day because studying English grammar is my favorite hobby. Again, when because is in the middle of the sentence, no comma. Remember, a dependent clause is not a complete sentence on its own. You must connect it to another sentence. Because it is raining. This is not a finished idea. You are waiting for more information. Because it is raining. What? What else? What are you doing because it is raining? You're waiting for additional information. However, that looks really similar to this. It is raining. This is a finished idea. Remember that subordinator because? Well, removing that subordinating conjunction makes this a complete sentence because that means you're not waiting for more information. When you add that subordinator, it magically changes a finished idea into an unfinished idea. Ah, on fire, we're incomplete. This is a bad sentence. Okay, a complete sentence without the subordinator. On fire, incomplete. Now it's a complete sentence again. Because it is raining, I brought an umbrella. Now, this is a complete complex sentence. The idea that is started in the dependent clause is finished in the independent clause. The last sentence that I mentioned at the beginning was a compound complex sentence, and that's exactly what it sounds like. A compound and complex sentence has both a compound and a complex sentence all in one. This type of sentence has two independent clauses and at least one dependent clause, and they're all joined together. You should follow the same punctuation rules that you learned about the previous sentence structure types for compound complex sentences. So in these examples, notice that the coordinating conjunction is in green and the subordinating conjunction is in purple. I'm a teacher, comma, and you are a student. The dog is sleeping, comma, yet the cat is awake so that it can catch the mouse. Studying English grammar is my favorite hobby, so I study every day because I love it. You can also create compound complex sentences with transition words or with semicolons as well. We'll be doing a lot of practice with this, and we'll talk about adjective clauses and noun clauses a little bit later.